Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Al Cardenas, Chairman of the American Conservative Union.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here. It's the first time this conference I've had a chance to say hello to all of you. This may well be the most important panel you're going to have during our conference, and I encourage you to be here because it'll be the central theme of this election cycle. You know, one of the great issues facing our country is President Obama's war on success. Yes, income inequality and increasing minimum wages will be the central focus of their campaign strategy. That's the core of their campaign. Once again, their spin masters are going to be talking about class warfare and appealing perhaps to America's lower instincts. We're here today because we're all passionate about this. And to speak to you, and I brought together a group of panelists that are superb and that you will enjoy tremendously. I want to start with the introductions of Evan Sayet. Evan is the creator and star of The Right to Laugh, the longest-running conservative comedy show in America. And I want you to give him a warm welcome. The author of The Kindergarten of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks and Why He's Convinced That Ignorance is Bliss. Evan? Next, I'd like you to welcome a very special guest, one of the most important men in America, the Honorable Steve Scalise, U.S. Representative for Louisiana. He's chairman of the Republican Study Committee. Yes, well worth a hand. He's a steadfast defender of the American dream and is a vocal opponent against tax, regulate, and spend agenda of President Obama and the liberals in Congress. Let's give a warm hand to Chairman Steve Scalise. Last but not least, someone that you all recognize from the media, Rich Lowry is the editor of the National Review. You know, the National Review, for your recollection, was the co-sponsor of the first CPAC and of many others 41 years ago. Founded by William Buckley, one of our founders, Bill Rusher, a great American, and others, Rich Lowry and the National Review have continued in a great tradition of bringing serious conservative thought and intellectual heft to the conservative movement, and we welcome him as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get started with a panel. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here and spending a good bit of your time. Obviously, we want to confront liberals in this class warfare experiment. We've had for 50 years a so-called war on poverty, where government's been spending more and more money trying to fight poverty and bring about success. And after 50 years, we're not advancing. We've spent a lot of money, and we've in many ways tried to change our culture of what success is all about. So we're here today, the four of us, to chat about what are the reasons for income inequality, and how do we help Americans on the lower end of the income stream prosper and have a shot at the American dream. And so maybe we start by the state of affairs today, and maybe we talk about perhaps what do we do as conservatives to give every American a better opportunity for success. And perhaps we want to comment about the President's ideas of getting government involved in one's success and on an income inequality. So let me start if I can. And before I get started, I want you to know that Chairman Scalise is awaiting votes in the Congress. We're running a little bit behind schedule in the conference, and so he may have to leave early. I hope not, but if he does, just know it's because it's a crucial vote that he needs to participate in.
Whatever it is, Chairman, we hope you're voting no.
Yeah. We're definitely going to be shutting down the EPA on some of their regulations today.
And I would like the opportunity to also get up and leave if I don't have anything to say. I've got an important vote somewhere. I've got an important call coming in. So if I get up and leave, you'll understand.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Chairman, what's being contemplated in the House, and how are you and your colleagues reacting to the central theme this year, minimum wage laws and income inequality.
Well, Al, if you look, the American dream's under attack. I mean, American families know that. They see what's happening, and it's frankly the policies of President Obama that are causing the problems in our economy right now. Look, I represent part of the city of New Orleans and all the suburbs. Many people know all the great restaurants that we have in New Orleans. When you talk to those restaurant owners, they will tell you to a person the biggest threat they face today in their businesses, and these are restaurants that are filled every single night producing world quality food, is the different policies coming down from the president, especially Obamacare. You literally have a law on the books right now that has perverse incentives to reduce your workforce below 50 employees and to take your full-time employees and move them below 30 hours. Those are in Obamacare that literally are forcing millions of people to both lose their jobs and to be reduced in their hours. And the White House's answer is, hey, you got more free time to go and sit on a park bench and read poetry. Well, you know, these people want to work. These people don't want to be forced out of their job by policies from not only the president's health care law, but look at what the EPA is doing to run millions of jobs out of our country. Look at what the National Labor Relations Board, the whole alphabet soup of the federal government right now is aimed at attacking the American dream and killing jobs in this country.
And I think the question has to become why? Because it's not like they don't know that this is what it's doing. It's not like they're not aware of the fact that there's, I think you call it perverse or reverse.
Perverse incentives.
Perverse incentives. But the concept is, if you've got an ideology that says that if you have a successful business, you didn't build it, then A, it's unfair for you. So it's a matter of fairness. It's not a matter of prosperity. It's not a matter of closing the gap. I believe that's sort of a fig leaf. It's actually an issue of fairness where if you have a successful business and you didn't build it, the first question is, A, why are you entitled to any benefits from that business you didn't build? And just as importantly, why didn't they build one for me? And then the answer has got to be because I'm short, because I'm tall, because I'm fat, because I'm thin, because I'm black, because I'm white, whatever it is that I can find a grudge against. And so this is really not an issue of the economics whatsoever. It's an issue, as it is across the board with what I call the modern liberals, of fairness.
Yeah. Rich, Brookings Institute, no beacon light of the right, has written numerous studies about lifestyle decisions and education being the two key factors in determining whether someone can lift themselves out of poverty. What are your thoughts on what America ought to consider about these things? Some involve government and some do not.
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I think you have to disaggregate two things. One is inequality, which is inevitable in a society of free people. The same trends we've seen towards increased income inequality in this country hold across every developed Western country, no matter what its policies are. So there are broad trends here at work. And when I debate liberals about this, I always ask them, who does inequality hurt? Who does it harm? If Mark Zuckerberg, who is increasing inequality in this country by the day, by the hour, by the minute, if tomorrow he stopped making any more income and all his wealth was confiscated, who would be helped? Well, the answer obviously is no one. So we shouldn't think in terms of inequality. We should think in terms of mobility. The question of whether people from the bottom are getting ahead. And as conservatives in this country would traditionally like to think of ourselves as the land of opportunity, the greatest country when it comes to mobility in the world, that's not quite true. You know, these international measures are disputed a little bit, but by some of them, Scandinavian countries, other English-speaking countries are more mobile than we are. So I think that the question in the broadest gauge is, you know, this country is going to be rich for a very long time, no matter how much we mess it up. This country is going to be powerful for a very long time, no matter how much we mess it up. And we're trying really hard to mess it up at the moment. The question is, will this be a good country? Will this country be America anymore? Will it be a country where people starting from the bottom reliably can make the most of themselves and get ahead? And that's the question we should be seized on. And the research shows it's very easy. You graduate from high school, you get a full-time job, which isn't as easy as it should be in this economy, and you get married before you have kids, your odds of being poor in America are extremely slim. If people were doing all those three things at the same rate they were doing them in 1970, poverty instantly without any government intervention would be reduced by 70%. So the solution to this problem broadly has to do with two words that conservatives should be very familiar with. One is liberty, to create a dynamic economy, and the other is responsibility, to create people who can thrive within that economy.
Yeah, Chairman Scalise, the one question one asks oneself since this war on poverty started 50 years ago, is our country's safety net growing to such a point that we're disincentivizing Americans from seeking employment, and what consequences does that have to the American spirit of of self-responsibility and self-sustainment?
Well, Al, we within the Republican Study Committee have tackled this head on. In fact, Steve Sutherland is the chairman of our anti-poverty initiative. We did a press conference on the day of the 50th anniversary of the war on poverty, and we said, why don't we actually go and look at the results? You know, government doesn't like to have the sunshine come on it to see exactly how these policies have worked. And so 50 years, over 50 years in a so-called war on poverty, these are two facts that we know. $15 trillion have been spent in the war on poverty. $15 trillion, enough to fund the entire government, every operation of the federal government for 4 years. $15 trillion, and you know what the results are? 10 million more people today are in poverty than before the war started. So clearly this has been a dismal failure, but there is one proven success. One time where Congress actually came in and said, let's look at this and do something different. And that was in 1996 when welfare reform was invoked. When the Republicans took control of the House, Bill Clinton vetoed the bill, finally relented and gave in. And look at what happened. Literally within a year, you had a dramatic drop in poverty. You had a drop in single mothers in poverty. All of the metrics you would want to look at and say what's good and what's bad. Good things happen when we actually invoked requirements to make people work, that were able to work, and to get rid of this safety net that says, right now in D.C., if you're in the District of Columbia, the federal government will pay you, with all the benefits combined, to be on welfare, $24 an hour. The Cato Institute did this study. $24 an hour the federal government's paying you not to work. And so when you have jobs right now that are open that will hire somebody at minimum wage or even higher, those employers are competing against the very federal government that's paying people not to work. All we're saying is, let's just put a requirement in that says if you've got an opportunity to go get a job, you can't be on the government dole.
But you have to look back at what Nancy Pelosi said about Obamacare, which is, she said, we see this as an entrepreneurial bill. This is a bill that allows you to leave your job and to pursue your passions. And now it doesn't matter if your passions, if you actually have any skill for your passions, and all of these welfare programs, this is the way the left sees it, is that that's their definition of liberty. You know, you go back to Thomas Sowell's A Conflict of Visions, and you have to always start with these two different ways that we look at things. Liberty to us means something completely different. What it means to them is free from the burdens, free from the constraints of doing a job you don't want to do. So it's
Evan, let me ask you,
yes, sir,
about that.
No,
with the millennium generation, right? Generation following mine as baby boomers, are there expectations, their goals, their perceptions of the American dream changed from my generation and your generation, and if so, how?
Well, I think everything changed post-World War II. I think that was the last. Think about this. From the dawn of time until just before we were born, every single human being who had ever lived had to be concerned about disease, hunger, poverty, and physical pain. By the time I was born, what disease? Polio? Vanquished. Chickenpox? Vanquished. Smallpox? Vanquished. The flu, which had wiped out 2/3 of a continent not all that long ago, is now a 3-day paid vacation. Hunger? What hunger? If you find a dollar bill on the street, you go to the 99-cent store and you buy yourself some dinner. All right, physical pain, so you don't have to be as smart as you had to be. I don't mean articulate. We're probably more articulate. More of us go to college than ever before. I don't mean clever, but as far as being right, as far as having the right values that protect you from the bad things and help you achieve the good things, everything was allowed to change after World War II, but we still had the influence of the great generations. The next generation, they became their grandparents, less of an influence. The next generation, the greatest generation, was off of the map, and now you have another generation that has never known a great generation. So absolutely, the definition of what is a good human being, a moral, self-reliant American, has changed from day one till the end of World War II. It was this pioneering and self-propelling spirit. And afterwards, no, we've become this kindergarten of Eden where 5-year-olds do not mature past the level of entitlement. 5-year-olds are entitled. Well, these are articulate children.
Rich, I went to, as an observer on behalf of our country, to Ukraine when they had their first democratic elections after 75 years of Soviet rule. And I went into the, so-called food valleys of Ukraine, and I would bring an interpreter and ask people. They had two choices. One, voting for a Marxist pro-Soviet Union candidate, and another one, not so hot a candidate, but at least he was pro-West. And the majority of the people, to my surprise, in those farming areas, were voting for the Marxists. And I would ask him, after 75 years of misery, why did you do that? And they look at me with a blank stare and say, well, how am I going to eat? And what happens if I get sick? They had gotten so used to government care, as poor as it was, and a lifestyle as diminished as it was, that they were afraid of a worse condition. Are we getting to that point in America where our dependence on government has changed the way Americans think?
Yeah, that's a huge question, obviously. And one thing I take heart from is that even the Democrats, when they're presenting their story to the American people, you watch the Democratic convention in 2012, they don't say, we're going to make people more dependent on government, and that's a wonderful thing. That's the country we want. What they do is they stand up there and they extol work. Michelle Obama talks about her disabled father and doesn't say, oh, he sat at home and had a lot of leisure time and got disability benefits. She says, no, he struggled up and down the stairs every day to go to work the way a man should. And that tells me that the basic American ethic of work is still alive and well, that even the Democrats feel as though they have to sell their program in those terms. And I think as conservatives, we have a twofold issue here. One, Steve, is what you highlighted just a moment ago, which is the governmental problem. You have government programs that the subsidies phase out as you earn more, so they discourage you from earning more, and they make you dependent on government, and welfare does not have the same work requirements as it did after welfare reform passed. It's steadily been eroded, including by this administration. So we need to focus on that, but we also need to focus on the very important cultural element, was just absolutely central. And I think it's worth mentioning the most important cultural bulwark to getting ahead in America, which is marriage, which is increasingly an institution just for the well-educated. If you look sort of the middle third of America in terms of education, people graduated from high school, got some college but didn't get a college degree. In 1982, in Reagan's America, the out-of-wedlock childbearing rate among those people was 13%. Now it's 44%, much closer than the lower end than the upper end. Do you know what the number is for out-of-wedlock births among college-educated people? It's 6%. 6%. That is Leave It to Beaver levels. And the problem is the top third is figured out. You get married before you get kids. You have kids. You put a huge emphasis on education. You work full-time, and you transmit those values to your kids. And where we might see a class divide that's becoming unbridgeable is all that social capital is getting passed along among the top, but in the lower end, in the middle increasingly, it's not, and that's extremely disturbing.
And that's one thing that disturbs me about the question about income inequality. The question is never why. They're going to resolve it through confiscation and redistribution without answering the question why. And the whys are very simple. They come from behavioral choices. They come from cultural choices. So no matter how many times you confiscate and redistribute, all you're going to do to close this gap is to bring everybody down unless you begin to raise up the bottom. The second point is to go back to what Rich said earlier. When Bill Gates gets fabulously wealthy, creating this wonderful thing, not only doesn't it hurt me, it helps me. I now write my screenplays faster than I ever did. I am now able to put out product faster and better than I ever did. There's a button there that helps me spell. I can't tell you how much that has changed my
Evan,
life.
let me ask you this about that, and I want to turn to the chairman about particular solutions that we as conservatives can look forward to. Why, for the first time, is this class warfare and resentment working prolifically in a successful way, unfortunately, in the electoral process.
Is that to me?
Yes.
Again, it's because up until fairly recently, you had Jimmy Carter, who was the closest to Barack Obama ideologically, but that was 1976. That was up till 1980. You still had the last of the great generations influencing as teachers, as legislators, as journalists. Once they moved on from those positions of power, and unfortunately now mostly from this earth, all that was left was this leftist ideology with nothing to pull back against it to say, hey, no, the great things that made America great are valuable and are important. There's not the countervailing voice that there was up through fairly recently with the last of the great generations.
Chairman, here we are. We're the party of less government. We're the party of Americans traditionally finding solutions to our challenges in the private sector through self-reliance, entrepreneurship, a can-do attitude about success. And that limited role that we as conservatives view government in our lives, what do conservatives in the House, the RSC, the committee that you chair, what do you think is our role in this whole process?
Well, I think we've got a very important role to play. And the president must have...
Just be careful, it's attached
But
to
yeah.
How weird does this look?
But if you look at the role...
Is this permitted at CPAC, this kind of...
If you look at the role that we ought to play, first of all, we've got to get back to being the party of big ideas. The Republicans have always historically been the party of big ideas, and the Democrats are the party of big government. You can see what big government is doing to our country, and people don't like it, but they don't see enough of what we stand for, because if you look at, there was a lot of hand-wringing across the country after the election in 2012. And, for those of us that were in that fog for days, and then we finally said, okay, there's only one bastion, and that's the House to try to hold on to the things that our country holds dear. If you look at what happened, people said, we've got to elect more moderate candidates. When's the last time that someone ran for president as a conservative and lost? You can't find that time. When we run as moderates, we lose. And people are hungry for big ideas. We've just got to get back to showing that to them. And what we're pushing in the Republican Study Committee is we've got the House. We don't have the Senate yet. I think we're going to get the Senate. But if we get the House and the Senate, and then ultimately the White House, people want to know what we're going to do, and we have to establish a mandate by laying that out now, using the majority we have in the House to bring bills to the floor. Obamacare is bad. I want to repeal Obamacare, but it's not good enough to say what we're against. We've got to show what we're for. We've done that in the RSC. We put together a health care alternative. It's called the American Health Care Reform Act. Over 120 co-sponsors of the bill put free market reforms in place. We repeal Obamacare, but we actually go and put patients back in charge of their health care. We focus on lowering costs. We're going to put together an RSC jobs bill. Look, the president talks about, I've got a pen and I've got a telephone. The president of the United States cannot use a pen to rewrite the laws of this country. That's not something the president can do as much as he wants to try. I'll tell you something the president can do right now with a pen is to approve the Keystone Pipeline and create 20,000 jobs in America. We need to put our ideas on paper. We need to put our ideas on the floor and force votes so that people have to pick and choose and say, this is what we stand for. What do you stand for? And people are hungry for these ideas. We need to push these ideas. We've got a few more months before the election, and we ought to be spending every day in the House advocating for those conservative principles that everybody knows have worked. They've worked every time they've been tried. Sometimes people get afraid of trying them. We got to get back to being the party of big ideas.
Rich, let's tackle an issue we haven't gotten to yet, minimum wage increases.
Yeah.
If you work at Burger King in Detroit, you're going to make minimum wages. And those folks who own those franchises and work hard are either barely making a living or underwater just because there's no consumer money. If you go seek a job at a Burger King in North Dakota today, you're making $20+ an hour. Just because the theory that there are more jobs available than there are workers to fill them. And so here we have this national debate now in our country about minimum wage and raising minimum wages. And frankly, the American people seem to, by the polling numbers, to favor the concept. And so what's wrong with the president's idea, and how do we conservatives sell our message to an electorate that at difficult times seems desperate to try any solution.
Yeah, the minimum wage represents what I think of as Obamacare thinking, as liberal, which is basically liberal thinking, which is if you hide the costs, you deny they exist, you call everyone a liar who says there are costs, you give the policy a nice-sounding name, and then you pretend it's going to produce wondrous results. That's what we had with Obamacare, which supposedly no one is going to lose their insurance and all the rest of it. That's what we have with the minimum wage, where the President of the United States has said there's no evidence that it costs jobs. And then you have the CBO 2 weeks ago saying, actually, it's going to cost 500,000 jobs. This isn't really hard to understand. What we should be doing is promoting policies that create economic growth and create jobs without destroying any jobs in the process. You know, that's not hard. And the minimum wage and the superficial level polls very well, but I think once you dig down a little bit and you present to people the costs, it's not so popular. And I just want to wholly endorse what the chairman said and what Mike Lee has been saying about this as well. You know, we have principles, which are very important, but we need practical application in policy of those principles as well. And Obamacare is an enormous gift to us. It's a great millstone around the neck of Democrats, but people still want to know what our alternatives are, not just on health care, but on everything else. And this is where I just want to salute Steve and just want to say, keep at it.
Hey, ditto. Evan, what are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, every single time we have the liberal try to create an artificial a reward, as opposed to one created by the marketplace, one created by logic. What you have is, once again, a divorcing of reward from merit. You know, the minimum wage was never intended, the minimum wage jobs were never intended to be lifelong careers. They were supposed to be stepping stones where perhaps you earned less money than you needed, but you stayed with your folks when you were young. If you had the job at 16, 17, 18, maybe you moved in with some friends. And then you moved on. You learned how to handle cash. You learned how to handle, to deal with the public. It was a stepping stone. It was a starter job. It was never meant to be a lifelong career. But now that it's become a lifelong career, you need a living wage. And of course, when it's artificially inflated, when it's not tied to what they are returning to the business isn't going to be sustainable. You know, at some point, you have to do the math. At some point, the utopian ideology comes up against the reality of the math.
Well, we've got about 4 minutes left. Let's see if each of us can spend about 90 seconds to wrap up and share our final thoughts with the audience about this very important topic. Rich, you mind starting out?
Sure. I want to go, if you don't mind, Al, to Abraham Lincoln, who I think is the most important figure representing aspiration in American life. And the president is obsessed with him, wants to kind of steal him and make him into a proto-progressive. I wrote a book about Lincoln this year, so on my mind a lot. You want to understand Lincoln and understand America, there's a story he used to tell about himself in the White House. He said he was a young man. He had a rowboat side of the river, and a carriage drove up with these two rich guys with their luggage, and they wanted to meet a steamboat coming down the river. And there was no way to get the steamboat because there was no wharf here at that point in the river. So they asked, hey, kid, will you row us out? And Lincoln said, sure. He rowed them out, helped them with their luggage, got them on the steamboat, all loaded up, ready to go. And he said, just as they were about to steam off, he said, hey, wait a minute, you forgot to pay me. And he said, decades later in the White House, to my shock and surprise, they each threw a silver $50 into the bottom of my boat. And I knew from that hour that I had earned my first dollar, and I became a more hopeful and optimistic being from that time. Lincoln wanted an America where he could earn dollars and where you had to earn dollars, and you didn't resent others for their success. When a delegation of working men came to visit him in the White House during the war, he said, let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but labor diligently to build one of his own. That is the true American spirit, and everything we push for and advocate should be in keeping with it.
I think that's pretty good.
I'm just wondering, are we applauding Rich or Abraham right at the moment? Yeah.
Chairman?
Well, I think one of the things that so many people are hungry for, to get back to that optimism, the things that make this country great, and we've got a great role model in Ronald Reagan. People that we still look to in terms of somebody who we idolize, in terms of somebody who really brought our country back to greatness, and the left still reviles him for those very same reasons because of how he transformed this country in such a great way. But if we want to get back there, we've got to go back and look at what made Ronald Reagan so great. Why was Reagan so successful? Why was his policy so successful? And then replicate that. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And just a couple of weeks ago was Ronald Reagan's 103rd birthday. I had the honor of having lunch with Michael Reagan, his son. And one of the things that Michael talked about was not just about the great communicator that we all know and what made Reagan the great communicator, but also about how President Reagan always talked about American exceptionalism. And I think it's such a stark contrast right now with what we have in terms of a president who goes and apologizes for American exceptionalism. And look at the different results. Without firing a single missile, President Reagan actually brought down the Soviet Union. And you've got right now a president who's, John Kerry's flying around and drinking Merlot with people and saying, let's all be friends. And they're laughing at us right now because they don't respect our country. And our allies are the ones that are most concerned because our allies don't want an America that's equal to everybody else. We don't want an America that's equal to everybody else. Our allies want a strong America so that we are the leader of the free world. That is our responsibility, and it's something we should strive for. And I'll finish with this. If you look back, America is such a great nation. It's a blessed nation, but it's a nation that's worth fighting for. And there is still an American dream that is under attack. But if you go look, nobody goes to Moscow to seek out the Russian dream. Nobody goes to Paris to seek out the French dream. There's only one place people go to seek out the dream, and that's the American dream. And it's a dream worth fighting for. We've got to engage in this battle and get it back.
Thank you. Evan, please wrap up.
We as conservatives and we as Republicans have a difficult job. It is so much easier to be a liberal and just say, give us your money, give us your power, and you'll have wonderful health. To have to actually describe why, to promise them less than utopia already sets us back a bit, and then to explain why our policy actually is better, why it actually works, is much more difficult, especially when you have poorly educated. I don't mean by number of years they spend in school, but what they are actually taught in school. So I have a program I call Adopt a Democrat. All right? The good news is America is not divided in two. We're divided in three. There are those of us who get it, who get that the better exists, that the exceptional exists, that America is exceptional, and we seek to conserve the things that made America exceptional. That's why we call ourselves conservatives. Right? All the way on the other side are the people like Rosie O'Donnell and about whom there's nothing you can do. If that's a relative of yours, kiss them, love them. I would say talk about the weather, but then there's global warming. So, but there's a whole bunch in the middle who have just never heard from a conservative what a conservative believes. Where would they have heard it? From their journalists? Which ones? From their professors? Which ones? From their movie stars at the Academy Awards? Which ones? So find one person in your life who you know doesn't hate America, who recognizes the better values of being married, who recognizes the ugliness of abortion and the horror that it causes. Find one person in your life, and I swear it's like adopting a child. That's why my book, forgive me, is called The Kindergarten of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks. And you do not pick every battle, but when they say something egregious, they say something so wrong, take that opportunity to correct them with the simple facts. We can't afford it. How does Obamacare work? And if you do, over time, I guarantee you will change people. And if we all change just one person, we've doubled our numbers.
Thank you. And that's a good thought to leave you with. Just remember, being a great conservative activist is about conversion and not rejection. We need to add to our numbers in order to become a working majority in America. And we do that by doing what Evan says and taking other steps to convert our fellow Americans to the right way of thinking. So, rejecting people is not the way to grow a majority, it's converting them. We've given you some solutions.
A little rejection occasionally is okay, right?
Yeah. Well, hopeless cases deserve rejection, but hope springs eternal. That was a Ronald Reagan way. We're a party of optimists, a party of solutions, and a party of can-do. And if you feel as strongly as all of us do about where America ought to be headed, you ought to be in the conversion business. Thanks for being here, and God bless all of you.